Cassie Ventura's testimony in the federal case against Sean Diddy has sent shockwaves through Hollywood, revealing a pattern of alleged abuse, coercion, and exploitation. The prosecution's star witness has dropped some major bombs during her days testifying. Here are some of the most disturbing moments from the courtroom. 1. The hotel hallway attack, 2016. One of the most visceral moments in Ventura's testimony was her description of a March 2016 incident at a Los Angeles hotel where Combs allegedly assaulted her in a hallway after she tried to leave one of his so-called freak-offs. Prosecutors played surveillance footage showing Combs chasing her, grabbing her by the hood of her sweatshirt, throwing her to the ground, and kicking her before dragging her back toward the room. Ventura, speaking softly but firmly, recounted how she had attempted to flee after Combs hit her during the event. She described scrambling to gather her belongings, running barefoot into the hallway, and being violently intercepted before she could reach the elevators. "I just knew I had to get out," she told the jury. "But when I got to the elevators, he grabbed me, threw me down, and kicked me. He took my stuff." The video, though partially edited for the court, was described by legal analysts as shock and awe evidence, undeniable proof of physical violence that could heavily influence the jury's perception of Combs' behavior. What made this moment even more chilling was Ventura's admission that such incidents were not isolated. When asked how many times Combs had thrown her to the ground in a similar manner, she replied, "Too many to count?" This suggested a long-standing pattern of physical abuse, reinforcing the prosecution's argument that Combs wielded control through fear and intimidation. The defense, however, was expected to argue that the altercation was an isolated incident, possibly even consensual in the context of their volatile relationship. But the video's graphic nature made that a difficult sell. Legal experts noted that while the footage clearly demonstrated domestic violence, the prosecution would still need to connect it to the broader charges, a challenge given that the incident appeared to be a private dispute rather than part of a larger criminal enterprise.
Cassie Ventura, who is 9 months pregnant, was on the stand for the second day in a row. The jury was shown photos of past injuries. She also testified the freak-offs left her with sores, frequent UTIs, and stomach problems. This afternoon, jurors watched a series of graphic images from freak-off sex parties involving Diddy and Cassie.
According to Cassie, she was embarrassed by it. She even talked about, what would I tell my mom if something like this got out? There was a text message shared from 2017 where she said nothing good comes out of freak-offs, and then she says, "You treat me like you're Ike Turner."
2. The orchestrated freak-offs. Central to the government's case were Ventura's detailed accounts of the freak-offs, multi-day sex parties that Combs allegedly organized, directing every aspect down to the smallest detail. These events, she testified, were not spontaneous but meticulously planned, often involving male escorts recruited through Craigslist. Combs dictated the sex acts, the use of baby oil consumed, including Viagra and MDMA, and even the positions and timing of each encounter. Ventura described these gatherings as choreographed, with Combs acting as a director who demanded strict compliance. "It was his fantasy," she said. "He controlled everything. The lighting, what we said, how we moved." The freak-offs reportedly took place in Combs' various homes, Ventura's residences, and luxury hotels worldwide. Ventura testified that she initially participated out of a desire to please Combs, whom she claimed to love, but over time, the events became increasingly coercive. She admitted feeling trapped, describing how Combs' temper would flare if she resisted. In one instance, she recalled him setting up an inflatable pool in a Beverly Hills hotel suite for a freak-off, pressuring her to join despite her discomfort. "If he wanted something to happen, it happened," she said. "There was no way out." What made these revelations particularly disturbing was the level of control Combs allegedly exerted. Ventura was not a passive participant, but a manipulated one, coerced into acts she found degrading. The prosecution argued that this went beyond personal domination. It was part of a broader pattern of exploitation that could meet the legal threshold for especially given the involvement of paid escorts and interstate travel. The defense, however, was likely to counter that Ventura's participation was voluntary, pointing to her initial compliance as evidence of consent. Yet her testimony painted a starkly different picture. One of a woman worn down by psychological and physical control, forced to perform under duress.
She said she didn't know specifically what he was taking day to day. So that's also very important to this case, Ted and Julia, because defense counsel talked about how Sean Combs used drugs. They're going to want to bring in some information about his drug use. And Cassie was not exactly clear on saying he was an addict or he was addicted to this or that. Her responses to those kinds of questions, she wasn't really giving much information. So defense counsel, when defense counsel presents its case, it definitely is going to bring up more information about the drugs that Sean was taking. And so defense counsel has said that they have...
Ventura's testimony also revealed the role played in the alleged abuse. She described how Combs encouraged, and at times pressured, her to take MDMA, ecstasy, and other substances during the freak-offs despite knowing they made her violently ill. "Almost every time before the high hit, I would vomit," she told the court. Yet Combs allegedly dismissed her sickness, urging her to continue participating in the events even while she was visibly unwell. "He would just tell me to get up and keep going," she said. This detail was critical to the prosecution's argument about coercion. By forcing Ventura to take impaired her judgment and physical state, Combs could maintain even greater control over her actions. Ventura admitted that she sometimes took the substances just to endure the freak-offs, numbing herself to the experience. The defense might argue that she willingly consumed the but her testimony suggested otherwise, that she did so under pressure with no real ability to refuse. The use of also tied into the trafficking allegations. If Ventura was intoxicated during these events, her ability to consent was legally questionable. Prosecutors emphasized that Combs not only supplied the but also dictated their use as part of the freak-offs, further blurring the line between coercion and criminal enterprise. 4. Pressure to take Viagra. Another unsettling revelation was Combs' alleged insistence that Ventura take Viagra. She testified that he claimed it would heighten her sensitivity, making her more responsive during the freak-offs. Though she didn't want to take it, she complied, describing the physical effects as intensely uncomfortable. "I felt sensitive and engorged." This moment underscored the broader theme of bodily autonomy, or lack thereof, in her testimony. Combs wasn't just controlling her actions, he was manipulating her physiology, dictating how her body should respond. The Viagra detail also highlighted the transactional nature of the freak-offs, where even Ventura's physical reactions were part of Combs' orchestrated fantasy.
Scheme. So there were a lot of questions where they were asking Cassie about who was providing the money, the materials for these freak-offs that they engaged in. And as she was talking about the fact that someone from his staff or a bodyguard would often be the one to drop off the drugs, the supplies, Sean Combs shook his head as though he was disagreeing with that testimony. The jury watched intently. I noticed them taking a lot of notes. There was one older woman in particular that just seemed like she couldn't take her eyes off of Cassie during that testimony. She was just watching her the entire time.
Katrina Kaufman, we appreciate that insight. We'll continue to follow your reporting closely. Thank you.
Finally, Ventura described how Combs wielded financial power over the male escorts involved in the freak-offs. They were paid thousands, anywhere from $1,500 to $7,000, but their compensation was tied to performance. If they ejaculated without Combs' instruction, they were paid less. Ventura recalled Combs openly criticizing escorts who didn't meet his standards, reducing their pay as punishment. This detail was pivotal for the charges, as it showed Combs allegedly profiting from and controlling commercial sex acts. The defense might argue these were private parties, but the prosecution framed them as part of a lucrative, exploitative system. One of the most bizarre yet telling details from Ventura's testimony was Combs' fixation on baby oil. She described how he demanded she be glistening at all times during the freak-offs, requiring her to reapply baby oil every 5 minutes. He would say, "You're too dry. You need to be shining," she recalled. This obsession explained why federal raids on Combs' properties in 2024 uncovered over 1,000 bottles of Johnson & Johnson baby oil, a stockpile that seemed excessive until Ventura contextualized it. She estimated that a single freak-off could consume nearly 10 large bottles, as Combs insisted on constant reapplication. The baby oil detail, while almost surreal, served a larger purpose in the prosecution's case. It underscored the level of control Combs allegedly exerted, micromanaging even the most intimate aspects of Ventura's body. The defense dismissed it as a personal preference, but prosecutors framed it as evidence of his commodification of her, treating her not as a partner, but as a prop in his orchestrated fantasies. 7. The GHB blackout incident. One of the most harrowing moments in Ventura's testimony came when she described a freak-off in New York, where Combs allegedly gave her GHB, a notorious date known for causing blackouts and memory loss. Ventura said she collapsed into what she called a G-hole, losing consciousness mid-event. When she came to, she was naked in a bathtub with Combs and another man, identified only as Dave, panicking over her. "I didn't know where I was or what had happened," she told the jury. This incident was critical for the prosecution, as it suggested Combs had mission, a potential felony in itself. GHB's association with sexual assault cases lent credibility to Ventura's claim that she was not a willing participant. The defense could argue that Ventura took the voluntarily, but her testimony painted a picture of disorientation and vulnerability, reinforcing the idea that Combs manipulated her physical state to maintain control. 8. The in-flight threats. Ventura also recounted a chilling episode on a private flight where she tried to distance herself from Combs by switching seats, only for him to seek her out and allegedly threaten her with retaliation. She testified that he pulled up videos of their freak-offs on his phone and warned her that if she ever left him, he would release the footage publicly. "He wanted me to know he had power over me," she said. This moment was pivotal for the prosecution's argument, as it demonstrated how Combs allegedly used psychological coercion to keep Ventura trapped. The threat of leaking explicit material is a well-documented tactic in abuse cases, often used to silence victims. Legal analysts noted that if the jury believed Ventura's account, it could support the claim that Combs engaged in sextortion, a form of exploitation punishable under federal law.
Now to the Combs trial in Lower Manhattan. Court has adjourned for the day in the sex trafficking trial. In her second day of testimony, Cassie Ventura, the key witness in this trial, says she felt like she was trapped and forced to engage in sex parties and stay with Mr. Combs because of videos he had of her at those parties.
And at times, she says she was targeted with violence, even kicked in the back and left with bruises all over her body.
9. The photo evidence of bruises. Federal prosecutors significantly strengthened Cassie Ventura's testimony against Sean Diddy Combs by presenting a series of graphic photographic evidence that supported her claims of physical abuse. These images were introduced to bolster her credibility and provide jurors with visible, tangible proof that her allegations were not merely verbal accusations, but were backed by documented injuries sustained during their relationship. One particularly compelling image was taken during a trip to Toronto. In the photo, Ventura is seen with her hair intentionally draped over one side of her face. During her testimony, she explained that this positioning was not a style choice, but a deliberate effort to conceal a bruise under her eye, an injury she attributed directly to Combs. According to Ventura, he had struck her during an argument, and the swelling and discoloration were severe enough that she felt the need to hide it from others, including those around her during the trip. In addition to the Toronto photo, the prosecution presented several other images taken over a span of months. These included close-up shots of dark bruises on her upper arms, thighs, and calves. Some of the bruises were large and irregularly shaped, suggesting blunt force trauma. Ventura testified that these injuries were the result of being thrown to the ground, kicked, and physically restrained by Combs. She described specific instances where he dragged her across the floor during violent episodes, and the prosecution pointed out how the bruises matched those accounts in both size and location. federal investigators reportedly obtained metadata from the photos to confirm when and where they were taken, further supporting Ventura's timeline. This digital verification undercut any suggestion from the defense that the images might have been taken at a different time or staged. Furthermore, the prosecution introduced messages and diary entries in which Ventura documented the incidents shortly after they occurred, adding more weight to the argument that the photos were not isolated or taken out of context. Prosecutors emphasized that the visual evidence directly contradicted any defense strategy aimed at portraying Ventura as an unreliable witness or suggesting that the abuse never occurred, while the defense floated alternative explanations that Ventura could have sustained the bruises from other causes such as accidental injuries or even self-infliction. Those claims were rendered increasingly implausible when considered alongside the consistency and specificity of Ventura's testimony, the dates on the photos, and her corroborating documentation. Legal analysts noted that such photographic evidence often plays a crucial role in cases involving domestic violence, where much of the abuse takes place behind closed doors and without third-party witnesses. In this case, the images served to bridge the gap between Ventura's narrative and hard evidence, providing jurors with a visceral reminder of the alleged abuse's physical toll. The combination of her emotional testimony and the stark imagery created a powerful impression that the prosecution hoped would be difficult for the jury to dismiss. 10. Psychological manipulation. Fix your face and pop pop. Beyond the physical violence, Cassie Ventura described a pattern of deeply rooted psychological control that Sean "Diddy" Combs allegedly exercised over her throughout their relationship. She recounted how he would regularly criticize her appearance, attitude, and even facial expressions, using commands like "fix your face" or "watch your mouth." According to Ventura, these verbal jabs weren't random insults, but carefully chosen tools meant to undermine her confidence and keep her in a state of constant submission and self-doubt. She explained that such remarks made her feel as though she was always walking on eggshells, never sure of when she might say or do something to trigger another outburst. Even more unsettling was Ventura's revelation that Combs insisted she referred to him as Pop Pop, the same affectionate nickname she had always used for her grandfather. "I thought it was weird then," she testified. "Now it just feels disrespectful and controlling." She described the request as deeply uncomfortable, especially given the connotations the name carried from her childhood. Over time, however, she felt pressured to comply, further illustrating how Combs blurred emotional boundaries to exert psychological dominance. This disturbing nickname demand played a key role in the prosecution's narrative, painting Combs as a calculating abuser who not only inflicted physical harm but also dismantled Ventura's sense of identity and personal agency. Prosecutors argued that this behavior was part of a broader strategy of coercive control, a pattern often seen in abusive relationships where emotional and psychological manipulation precedes and accompanies physical violence. The aim, they said, was to keep Ventura isolated, confused, and dependent, making it easier for Combs to maintain power over her. Ventura's testimony formed a compelling portrait of a relationship where control was exerted not just with fists, but with words and manipulation. The prosecution made it clear that the psychological abuse she endured was not secondary to the physical violence. It was foundational. By consistently undermining her self-worth and autonomy, Combs allegedly created a toxic environment in which Ventura felt trapped, confused, and unable to escape. 11. Fear as a weapon. Throughout her testimony, Ventura returned to one overarching theme: fear. She described Combs' explosive temper, his unpredictability, and the dread she felt at defying him. Whether it was participating in a freak-off with an inflatable pool or enduring his verbal attacks, she framed her compliance as survival. "If he wanted something to happen, it happened," she said. "There was no way around it." This admission was perhaps the most damning, as it painted Combs not just as an abusive partner, but as a predator who weaponized fear to enforce obedience. The prosecution argued that this fear was the linchpin of his alleged operation. Without it, Ventura and others might have resisted sooner. As the trial progresses, the jury must decide whether these actions constitute not just personal cruelty, but federal crimes. Ventura's testimony, however, has already achieved one thing. It has shattered the glossy facade of Combs's public persona, exposing the darkness beneath.